This is Phantomania. This is Phantomania.
Welcome, true believers, newcomers, and Phantomaniacs alike, to another episode of Philosophical Breakdowns. I'm your host, JP Fandom, creator and founder of acphantomania.com. And today, we're going to be web-swinging right into action to one of Marvel's most well-loved and well-renowned superheroes ever to hit the pages of comic books and ever to grace us with his presence on the silver screen. I'm talking about none other than Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's greatest creation from the golden age of comic books and beyond. I am talking about the webhead himself, Spider-Man.
In the summer of August 1962, the iconic webhead superhero known to all of us as Spider-Man web-swung his way into our hearts and imaginations in issue number 15 of Amazing Anthology comic books. Since then, the wall-crawling superhero has had commercial success for decades to come and still captures the hearts of true believers and newcomers alike. Created in the Silver Age of comic books by Marvel icon writer Stan Lee, along with writer-artist Steve Ditko and artist-illustrator Jack Kirby. The webhead was brought into a time period where the comic book industry saw widespread artistic advancement and commercial success. Spider-Man has had a total of 9 animated series, the first one being the Spider-Man 1967 cartoon, which ran on ABC till 1970, produced by Grand Freight Lawrence Animation. Then there was the Spider-Man 1981 cartoon, followed by Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends cartoon, which also ran in 1981. Then there was the iconic Spider-Man 1994 series, which is going to be the forefront basis point of which I am going to be discussing this philosophical review on. Now, this series ran on Fox until 1988. This series was also one of the series that had the most influence in further Spidey incarnations, such as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man film, which consisted of 3 films, all of which had heavy influences from the Spider-Man 1994 animated series. And what was unique about the Spider-Man 1994 animated series is that it created episodes from the storylines that came directly from the comic books, with their own unique little twist to them, some of which included the Secret Wars and the Alien Costume Saga. What gave the show such a great success was the creative oversight of Stan Lee and the creative writing of head writer John Semper Jr. Stan Lee and John Semper Jr. knew each other from working at a different company called Marvel Productions. Semper used a model of telling stories with half-hour dramas and applied it to the 1994 series. This series also introduced the idea of crossovers with other Marvel superheroes like X-Men, Daredevil, Punisher, Blade, Iron Man, and Captain America. The series was not only the first one to bring the idea of a Marvel universe to life in animation, but also the idea of multiverse. We will get into that later on in this podcast. There was also SpiderMan Unlimited, which was a loose sequel to the 1994 series, which tried to expand on the idea of a multiverse, as well as the final season of the 1994 series. It ran in 1999 with only 1 season. The last 3 animated series were Spider-Man, the new animated series, which ran in 2003, and The Spectacular Spider-Man, which ran in 2008, Ultimate Spider-Man, which ran in 2012, and finally, Ultimate Spider-Man, which also ran in 2012. Now, over the years, the Amazing Spider-Man has had many cinematic movies that portrayed the webhead in his iconic web-swinging role and allowed Spider-Man to be fermented as a household name. The first 3 movies of Spider-Man were produced by Evil Dead creator Sam Raimi. Raimi's first 2 films had box office success, with the first one, which came out in 2001, starring Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, which is said to be the product of the bygone era for telling a simple, popular superhero story and how it affected the character's life and loved ones, which is why this film holds a special place in the hearts of all Spidey fans. The second installment in the Spider-Man Raimi films, which came to theaters in 2004, did astonishingly well, topping the work of the first film and introducing the famous villain Dr. Octopus, played by Alfred Molina. Then the third installment to the Spider-Man Raimi film, which did poorly due to the messy plot and introduced the iconic villain anti-hero known as Venom. However, the villains like the Sandman and Green Goblin were already in the film. Venom just made the film a huge mess. Raimi's three films had heavy influence in the storylines from the Spider-Man 1984 animated series, which is seen a lot in both the first and third Spidey films. It also featured the iconic Mary Jane Watson and characters like Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn,
as well as getting an accurate portrayal of the character J. Jonah Jameson, the head editor of the Daily Bugle,
whose portrayal had a striking influence and a striking resemblance, if I may add, to the 1994 animated Spider-Man series. Then we had the 2012 The Amazing Spider-Man, which starred Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, and Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. The Amazing Spider-Man then had a sequel in 2014. Now, while Garfield and Stone's chemistry made the movie enjoyable to watch, and the rest of it felt like a Sam Raimi remake that no one wanted, the sequel brought us a villain like the Shocker, and also gave us the famous Gwen Stacy death, in which Spider-Man tries to save her from the Green Goblin, but with his webbing, but ends up snapping her neck due to the fall. The story also had a lot of plot points and crammed too many villains along with Rhino and Green Goblin. It was like the problem that they had with this series is that they did not learn from the mistakes of Raimi's three films. Then we have the iconic 2017 Spider-Man Homecoming, which stars Tom Holland and as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, and Marissa Tomei as the hot young Aunt May. It also features Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, Tom Holland as Spider-Man, which was the first to make his appearance in Captain America Civil War in 2016, in which the Webhead teamed up with Iron Man, Black Panther, Black Widow, War Machine, and the Vision against Captain America, Winter Soldier, Falcon, Ant-Man, Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, and also the Spider-Man Homecoming, which was a fun film that had fresh storylines and a very energetic Peter Parker. It also fermented the Webhead into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so for once, the fans were actually getting to see a lot of these iconic characters, not just Spider-Man, but Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, the Hulk, actually team up, for the first time as we see in the comics. Now, recently in 2018, we were introduced to the epic new concept known as the SpiderVerse, which introduced a biracial version of Spider-Man known as Miles Morales, a high school student who is half black and half Latino. In this comic-style 3D animated film, we are introduced to several incarnations of the Webhead from different universes, time periods, races, genders, and species. Not only did we get to see a version of Spider-Man as the main focus, but we got to see him interact with the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Spider-Woman, which was Gwen Stacy, a version of Gwen Stacy that didn't die but took the mantle as the Webhead, Spider-Man Noir, a version of Spider-Man that is a detective in the 1930s who fights Nazis, Peter Porker, aka Spider-Ham, a comedic version of Spider-Man who lives in a cartoon, like the world that's something like straight out of a Looney Tunes show. So you could say that, hey, maybe Porky Pig might become Spider-Man. Then we had Penny Parker, a Japanese female version of the Webhead, who pilots a robot suit with radioactive radioactive spider. She is known as SPDR. The epic team of webheads teams up to fight the Kingpin, a villain famously known in both Spider-Man and Daredevil. From opening and also the movie goes from opening a dimensional portal. Now, to those new to the Spider-Man or the concept of a multiverse in the comics, who think this is the first time that this has been done, well, true believers, it's not. The idea of a multiverse and a SpiderVerse has been introduced in the world of Spider-Man before, and many comics alike. Heck, this is not only the first time the Spider-Verse idea was brought to life on screen. In fact, the Spider-Man 1994 series first introduced us to the idea of that in the final 2 episodes of the final season, known as the Spider Wars, which took place immediately after the Secret Wars arc. Yes, the Spider-Man 1994 animated series introduced the first original Spideyverse with Spider Wars. This was the brainchild of head writer John Semper Jr., who wanted Spider-Man to save all of reality at the end of the series. At the end of the Secret Wars, Spider-Man is transported by the Beyonder to an alternate New York after it's been through hell and left in ruin, in which we find the Hobgoblin and Green Goblin working under this reality's Peter Parker, a Spider-Man that's bonded with the Carnage symbiote, turning him into Spider-Carnage. The Beyonder and Madam Web, who was voiced by Stan Lee's wife, Joanne Lee, tells Spider-Man that he must lead a team with Spider-Man from different realities to stop Spider-Carnage from opening up an interdimensional hole that could destroy all reality. Similar to the plot in Into the Spider-Verse, in this 2-part special, we are introduced to some awesome cool Spideys, if I may add, that had a big influence on the 2016 comic book storyline of Into the Spider-Verse. We get a clone of Peter Parker known as Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, Spider-Man equipped with the arms of Dr. Octopus, a 6-armed Spider-Man, which was a nod to a previous storyline in the animated series. Also, the Armored Spider, which lives a lifestyle of Tony Stark, who is like an Iron Man version of Spider-Man, and at last, a powerless Spider-Man who plays an important role as the story progresses. I don't want to give away too much about this saga. If you want to know what happens, buy the Spider-Man 1984 animated series and watch the original Spider-Verse in all of its glory. Believe me, you won't be disappointed. Now, what makes Spider-Man so iconic? Well, let's see. He was one of the first superheroes to introduce the idea of a multiverse. Also, he was the first superhero to bring a crossover storylines in a motion picture animated series with other superheroes. Also, Spider-Man broke grounds with the inspiring idea of there being a comic book universe in a cinematic universe. He was one of the first Marvel superheroes that put superheroes in the mainstream when it came to cinematic films. Also, he was one of the superheroes that introduced the concept that the incarnation of a superhero can be told in many different ways. Lastly, Spider-Man left the most iconic words that to this day echo in the hearts of Spidey fans and true believers alike. With great power comes great responsibility. That being said, what makes Spider-Man such a likable character is not only the fact that he introduced the concept of multiverse, but he is kind of an example of an underdog superhero. Because if you look at Peter Parker, he's a bit of a wimp. He is into science. He's very nerdy. He's kind of an outcast. He's picked on, and he wants to go after the girl of his dreams. But unfortunately, he's faced with much adversity from everyone, and in a classic superhero-like fashion, where he gets bit by a spider, he's able to gain the abilities of a spider, which, in a way, although it serves as a plot point, it kind of serves as a narrative to how one needs to accept responsibility with the powers that they have, and this is shown in great detail in Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film, when Uncle Ben Parker tells Peter that he's changing and that with great power comes great responsibility. And what made this moment so great is that people don't realize that that was said not only in the comic books, but it was very heavily used in the 1994 Spider-Man animated series. I keep on referring to this series a lot because, like I said, it's had a lot of influence on the films and future incarnations of Spidey. If you ask a lot of early Spider-Man fans, when they think of Spider-Man as an adaptation from beyond the comics, the first thing they think of is the 1994 animated series, which was not only beautifully drawn, but at the time used a combination of 3D buildings for the backgrounds of the buildings of New York, which was definitely groundbreaking at the time in the 90s when we were all still new to computer animation. So, that being said, Spider-Man, as a superhero himself, like we all, especially me, I who watched it growing up as a kid, Spider-Man definitely grew with us with the times and was able to adapt, and he was still able to keep his familiarity of being that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and being the Spider-Man to kind of bring together all of our iconic superheroes. In a way, we can all say that Spider-Man is an example of what, the average nerd would be like as a superhero, because that's who the narrative of Spider-Man very much appeals to, especially to me. I remember growing up as a kid, I was very nerdy, and when seeing the Spider-Man movie for the first time, I actually imagined myself as Peter. That's how it would be like in high school as Peter Parker, and that's how I, imagined, if I were to gain spider powers. And what Spider-Man definitely shows us in a philosophical way is that even though when Peter Parker gains his powers and then he thinks, he could get whatever he wants, he doesn't realize the responsibility. And I think this could be reflected in real life when, especially for those of you nerds listening out there, listen closely to this, we have this ability to to be smart, and we pride ourselves as nerds in an intellectual way, and having this ability to be, whether we're tech savvy or whether we're literature savvy or something that makes us nerdier than the average human being. But we need to realize that whatever opportunity we may get, we shouldn't squander it like the rest of the world, because that's what makes us unique, is we're able to put what other people don't put aside for the greater good and for the benefit of improving the world around us. And that's what Spider-Man did by accepting the fact that he had great power and he had great responsibility. And when he saw his uncle died, that was like a lesson that to a lot of people, especially I felt when I first watched it, that the words that our elders, our parents teach us is something that we should never ever take for granted, which the Spider-Man movie did a good job of portraying this and driving home this narrative. Another thing that Spider-Man has definitely done, especially the Spider-Man 1994 series, it has introduced the concept of Hugh Everett's multiple universe theory, and it does so very well by introducing the idea of there being a SpiderVerse, especially with the Spidey Wars, and the fact that there are multiple versions of Peter Parker. And it's further expanded upon that there's multiple versions of Spider-Man, but they're all different people. With the Spider-Man into the SpiderVerse movie. And what also makes it very unique is the fact that we're introduced to the idea that the idea of a superhero and the icon of which a superhero is built on and what he stands for, like, doesn't go away just because the person behind it goes away. It shows an idea that ideals kind of don't die. This is shown perfectly when they make Spider-Man 2099, which when a character known as Miguel O'Hara takes up the mantle of Spider-Man after what is known as the Heroic Age. And so one thing that I can definitely say with Spider-Man is it become the blueprint of the Marvel cinematic universes, and it's become, in a way, watching the Spider-Man 1994 cartoon. What people don't realize is that this was meant to be marketed as a kids show, but the storylines were so profound, so unique, and so adult themed. And I say that in the way in which some of the subject matter was very kind of mature for what could go through a kid's head, because a kid isn't necessarily worried about whether they need to get a job or whether they need to impress this girl, or whether they have to keep their loved ones safe. But in a way, it's a story that kind of like that the series was able to gravitate towards not only the young audience as kids, but they were also able to gravitate towards the adult audience with its complex storylines. And so that's what makes us Spider-Man 1994 such a unique philosophical anecdote, and that in a way it set up the idea and blueprint of what being an adult, at least in the sense that we're dealing with complex scenarios, and then with a philosophical emphasis, especially with Peter Parker always being given a lesson by Madam Web, such as in the episode where Carnage makes an appearance and she teaches him that one must keep his friends close but keep his enemies closer, and also understanding with being aligned with the responsibility that one is given. And so in a way, Spider-Man kind of puts the profound complexity of what makes Marvel superheroes very unique, because if you look at a lot of Marvel superheroes, they all deal with complicated issues. Like if you look at the X-Men, for example, Xavier and Magneto, they are based off of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, in which they are two sides of the same coin, in which the mutants, they're all unique and they all see each other as individuals and they want to help humanity, but there's people who do not see mutants that way. And there's even an episode where Spider-Man goes to the X-Men for help, but then when they invite him to become one of them, he doesn't want to be seen as a mutant freak, and he kind of doesn't understand that in a way they are just trying to fight for a cause, just like his cause is to kind of accept the fact that he is Spider-Man and he's always going to have that responsibility to use those powers. Another thing that makes Spider-Man the 1994 cartoon and Spider-Man unique as a superhero in general is the fact that Spider-Man's story is the perfect example of what is known as a hero's journey, as stated by John Campbell, where Spider-Man getting his powers is a call to adventure, and then him struggling to understand those powers and understand himself and how he's changing is part of him going through the threshold, and him losing Uncle Ben is a revelation that transforms him, and on the other way he has more transformations, and then he has a bit of an atonement when he takes up the mantle of Spider-Man, and understanding that with great power comes great responsibility, and then in a way it coming full circle. And I think it's really great, and it's very shown. It's shown greatly that in the last episode of the Spider-Man 1994 cartoon. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to give any spoilers, but without giving little away, there's one iconic moment in that cartoon where Spider-Man does meet Stan Lee, and they actually got to animate the one of the co-creators, Stan Lee, and he meets him, and Spider-Man gives one of the most iconic speeches and talks with Stan Lee that demonstrate that Spider-Man not only set the template and the blueprint for future Spidey storylines in the cinematic universe and other incarnations beyond, but also that him as a character of fiction definitely grew with us, and in a way he grew as a character as well as the audience, which can be shown here.
I said to Jack, what if his skin turns green?
Excuse me. I'm looking for some guy named Stan Lee.
What? Spider-Man? Pam, hold my calls for a while. I think I've finally gone crazy. Oh, man! Wow! You know, Spidey, I've always wanted to experience real web-slinging.
And I've always wanted to be appreciated as a real hero. It seems you've made me into one. Thanks.
Hey, don't mention it. After saving all of reality, where do you go from here?
To find Mary Jane. My Mary Jane. I've been told she's still alive. I can't wait to see her. You know, for so long, I've thought that I never got any breaks. But now, after all I've been through, for once, I like my life. I like myself. And for the first time ever, I wouldn't want to change anything about me.
Gee, you're definitely not the same guy I've been writing about all these years.
Well, Stan, we all have to grow up sometime, I suppose. Even us, characters of fiction.
Spider-Man, it's time to go.
Who is that exotic lady?
Oh, her? Now, she's my ride. It's been great meeting you. Take care of yourself.
You too, Spider-Man. Farewell and good luck. Wow, I wonder how I'm supposed to get down from here. I suppose I could wait for the Fantastic Four to drop by and give me a lift.
And that was our philosophical breakdown on Spider-Man, the icon, in the 1994 animated series. Thank you very much for watching. I'm JP Fandom, your host. Please give a like, subscribe, and comment below what you would like me to philosophically break down next, be it comic book, anime, or a series that you simply grew up with. Thank you, and good night.